welcome to the Your Pennsylvania Ancestors podcast. This is Denise Allen. In today's episode, we have Robbin Degeratu, Administrative Director of the Centre County Library and Historical Museum. She's going to share their extensive collection available for genealogists all over the world. The Centre County Library and Historical Museum is located in the wonderful town of Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. And it's got an incredible collection of not just original county records, but also a really unique collection developed by one woman, and you don't want to miss the description of what's in this collection. Robbin will share some advice for first-time researchers, and also an incredible story of discovery that I think you'll really enjoy. And now, here's Robbin. Welcome to the podcast, Robbin Degeratu. I think I got it pronounced correctly. All right, great. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give us a little background about the Centre County Library and Historical Museum.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me, Denise. So as she said, my name is Robbin Degeratu, and my title is Administrative Director of Centre County Library and Historical Museum. And that's a bit of a misleading title, but one of my responsibilities is managing one of our locations, the Pennsylvania Room and Historical Museum. So the Pennsylvania Room is a genealogical and historical reference library. And what makes us a Pennsylvania Room is a micro-level reference collection that includes specific resources for municipalities and counties within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that's why we're called the Pennsylvania Room. We are one of the major research facilities in Centre County, and we have a lot of really great resources, a lot of kind of unexpected resources, and people travel from all over the country to come to Centre County and to come to the Pennsylvania Room, and will spend like a whole week doing research with us because of the cool stuff that we have.
I've been one of those people that has traveled to the Pennsylvania Room. They're in Bellefonte, PA, and I do have to throw in that Bellefonte is an absolutely adorable town.
It is.
It's very historic looking. People will love visiting. You really feel like you're walking in the steps of your ancestors a little bit while you're there. And can you tell people, especially first-time researchers that might not be used to going somewhere to do on-site research, what are some like really interesting things that you have?
Oh, interesting things. Absolutely. So I mentioned, we're this genealogical and historical reference library. We're part of a public library system, so we're a little bit different than some of the other research centers in Pennsylvania in that we have a handy-dandy catalog where you can search a lot of our monographs, so a lot of our compiled books. And we have a specialized reference collection of more than 3,000 volumes that are related to genealogy and local history. So I mentioned before that micro-level collection, and it includes specific resources for specific municipalities on what I would call like a micro level. So for example, if you have an ancestor who's from Bellefonte, you can go to the shelf and find church records, not just for Centre County, but for Bellefonte, for a specific church. If you have ancestors who attended the First Presbyterian Church of Bellefonte in the 1800s, I can get you a book for that. We also have a large collection of patron-provided manuscript genealogies. So maybe someone's done some of the work for you. There's some low-hanging fruit kind of just sitting on our shelves. We also have indices to vital records, marriage records, obituaries, cemeteries, and all of that, because as you kind of dig into doing your research, you'll find that obituaries are not always on page A4 of the newspaper. Newspapers are not always sometimes you have 8 newspapers being published in a specific area, so having an index to something like that is an incredible asset. And speaking of newspapers, we have historic Centre County newspapers dating back to 1821.
Can I ask you about the newspapers in Center County? Because this is one of the few counties I've ran into this, is there are a lot of newspapers in Center County. Like, I think there was like running at the same time. Like, weren't
Yes,
there like 8 newspapers? I mean,
there.
some
Yeah.
were weekly, but
Yeah, so we have a lot of weeklies, but we see, we have a really active publications kind of culture in Center County. And a little sidebar, one of the reasons that Bellefonte, the town that we're located in, is so famous, or, we like to say it's famous at least, is because 7 governors have actually lived in Bellefonte at one point or another. 5 of them were governors of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and one was a governor of Kansas, one was a governor of California. But the reason that those people chose to live here is because of this culture of publishing newspapers. Because in the 1800s, in particular in the United States, publishing a newspaper was an incredibly well-respected political kind of job. So there's a lot of that happening. At any given time, we might have 8 different newspapers being published. And so if we're looking at, for example, an obituary, we might be able to find 4, 5, 6 obituaries for the same person across those different newspapers. And some of them might be the same, but some of them might be different.
I did notice that for some of my ancestors that I can trace to that county. It was a real joy because volunteers in the past must have indexed these obituaries, and the newspapers are on microfilm,
Mm-hmm.
so I could go right to the date, on the microfilm, and yeah, I would look up all of them because they did vary just slightly. Like some would name the extended family, some wouldn't. For my one ancestor who actually died in an asylum, I think he had dementia when I got his file pulled, but he only had an obituary in one paper, just a little tiny paragraph. But that gave me the clue I needed in order to, figure out where he was. Yeah, so your on-site resources are definitely wonderful because there's so much that's not online, and I think people don't realize that.
Absolutely. And one of the most popular, I guess, resources that we have is something we call the Spangler Index. So a genealogist around the turn of the 20th century named Adela Fink Spangler was working really hard here in Center County. And she was doing research not just for her own family, but for other families as well. And she was writing to people for Bible transcriptions and combing through tax assessments and looking at poor children's lists and things like that. And she compiled hundreds of notebooks of genealogical information and indexed it in a 250,000 card catalog. And when she passed away, she donated that to us. So we have this really rich, completely unique genealogical index that's been donated by a really exceptional researcher. And that information is not available anywhere online. The index isn't online, the notebooks aren't online. And that's really the case, I would say, with a lot of what we have. Someone once said to me that, of all the genealogical records that exist, only 10% have even really been discovered. Of that 10%, a tenth of those have been digitized. And of those that have been digitized, only a tenth have been indexed.
Oh, wow.
So getting a resource that's so easy to search, like the Spangler Index, is such a boon for researchers.
It is. It's so fun. I used it. I had some ancestors in there. The card catalog is wonderful. I love card catalogs. It's like one of my things. And going through there and seeing the care that a woman who's a complete stranger to me, right? I have no relation to her. She had no relation to my ancestors, but she, with the care and love that she took to document people's lives, it was just wonderful. And the same goes, I did want to make a reference too, back to your, the genealogies that you've collected from people that have donated them. Always check to see what's been done before you in the county where your ancestors lived, because somebody could have documented your whole family. And there could be stories in there and, Bible pages and things that, yeah, you're just never going to find online.
Absolutely.
what other advice do you have for first timers? You must have a lot of people that come in because you are a public library. It's totally free to come in, correct? You don't.
Yes, no fee to enter. We don't have any restrictive rules like some research centers do. We only really restrict food and drink. That's it. So, the first thing is if you are coming in, and this really applies to any research center, not really just the Pennsylvania Room, we have an overwhelming amount of information available. So if you have a limited amount of time, always make a list of either a few research questions or a few goals that you would really like to try to address during your visit. Because when you show up, it is really easy to get overwhelmed or jump from one thing to another. Not that that has ever happened to any of us.
That's why I'm laughing. I mean, that was totally me. Totally.
It happens. It does happen. And we run into the same thing when we do research online, but when we're in person, it's a little more complicated because nothing that we're working with is what Denise and I would call pajama accessible. You can't just access it in your jammies. I mean, if you wear your jammies, then we're not going to judge you. But, but if you focus on a few things, you can make the best use of your time and you can ask our staff specific questions. Another thing, and again, this applies to pretty much any research center, is look online before you get there, especially if you're already really comfortable using the internet. Go to our website, which is www.centercountylibrary.org, center with an R-E, and kind of do some searching. Look on our genealogy page, do some searches for your surnames, and that'll help you kind of get oriented to what's available. We also have a handy page that kind of provides an overview of things like where to park, things like what things cost. So we don't charge an entry fee, but we do charge for copies, or we do charge a flat fee, for example, for creating scans or photos or whatever. But also call or email our team members in advance of your visit. So first of all, you mentioned we're in this beautiful historical town. We're also in a 205-year-old building, so sometimes we have to close that building for maintenance. So call, confirm that we're open, and also let us know briefly what you want to work on, how you want to use your time, because if we know in advance that you're coming in, we can kind of be prepared for you and be prepared to steer you in the right direction when you get here.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a good idea. Mention the surnames that you're researching, mention your research goals, what you're trying to find out. It's a great way to confirm that the information people want is actually there to begin with, I think a lot of folks sometimes with first-time research, there is that line in Pennsylvania where, the state takes over vital records, so those aren't going to be in any county facility.
Exactly.
So just simple things like that. I do want to ask too, I'm still laughing about the pajama comment, by the way.
I'll take that out. We are a public library.
I just picture me like trudging in my pajamas. But so for researchers that are not able to travel to Bellefonte, what can you provide for them?
So we do provide offsite research services. So I did mention before, if you are not able to travel to us, you should absolutely visit our website and see what you can kind of poke around, see what you can find. But I made that comment earlier about how few things have been digitized. That's even more true for our facility. Things are just not digitized. We just do not have the capacity to digitize most of our materials. But we do provide offsite research services for a fee. So those fees really depend on the type of request that you have, but we have these great staff members who, in addition to facilitating research of people who are here in the building, also help conduct that paid research for our distance users.
Okay, great. That's good to know. So if someone needed a probate record from the county, that's something that they could manage through you.
Absolutely, and that's one thing I actually forgot to mention when we were talking about resources, and I apologize if I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, because one of the things that makes our facility unique among other facilities like ours in Pennsylvania is that we are actually caretakers of original government records. So we have, in the 80s, our county ran out of space for a lot of its records. So the earliest marriage license applications, tax assessment records, probate files, orphans court dockets, civil and criminal court papers, and even road petitions. Those early documents were all transferred to our facility. So we sometimes will make copies of those for some of our distance patrons, or for people who are on site. They're able to make copies of them.
Wow. That's great, though. I mean, I live in a county where the original records were mishandled at one point. And so it's nice to know that in your county, when they ran out of room, they contacted the library and reached out. And it's wonderful because it feels a little bit like you're almost like a one-stop shop for genealogy.
Wow, that's what we try to be. I mean, we are certainly happy to refer people elsewhere if we don't have it, but we are a good place to stop first if you're coming to Center County to do research. Let's just say that.
Definitely. Do you have, I always love for folks to share who are, right there hand in hand with researchers. Do you have a story of a memorable discovery or thing that you helped people find?
Oh man, I mean, well, first of all, I should say that working with genealogists is such a rewarding job. It's such a nice thing to call work because, genealogy is inherently sentimental. It's inherently emotional. And we're literally helping people connect with their past, which is great. So I mentioned before, we have these government records. And in addition to having these government records on site, we have teams of volunteers who have spent a lot of time going through and indexing oddball things. And one of the things that have been indexed are criminal court records from the 1800s to a certain extent. And so why does this matter? Why does this matter for genealogy? Well, in the 1800s in Center County, Pennsylvania, and I'm sure a lot of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, what would have been classified as extramarital fornication was a criminal offense. So if a woman who was known to be unmarried showed up in town and was obviously expecting a child, a criminal inquest would take place. And as a result of this inquest, we end up with a lot of criminal court documentation that would ultimately prosecute the man who, quote unquote, committed fornication upon her and laid her with a bastard child. We end up with, that sort of documentation, and also what would have been classified as 1800s era child support. So regardless of how someone might feel that, gosh, it was probably the first year I was working here, so about 4 years ago, someone contacted me and was really struggling to identify a parental connection mid-1800s with one of their ancestors. And they said to me, hey, I think there might be an illegitimate birth here. I think my ancestor may have been a bastard. Well, we have in our facility a handy fornication and bastardy index has been created because our tireless, fearless, really diligent volunteers indexed these criminal court records. So I was able to pull up the Cunningham file and find out all about the man who got this person's mother pregnant. And I was able to get the names of both of the parents, the names of the child, and this is, a really great genealogical resource. I mean, is this, 21st century DNA testing? No. Is this the closest we are going to get in the 1800s in Center County? Yes, it is. So we've created a documentary paper trail for this person to connect an illegitimate child to their father and to continue their research and their line.
Wow. Center County wins for the most unique index. That is fantastic. And so handy because that is how we do lose the trail.
Absolutely.
Of some of our ancestors. They say, they'll say, oh, the parents are such and such, and, or whatever, when they died later in the 1800s. Maybe in one of those really esteemed biographies, that were done in a county, and you're like, oh great, I have parents' names, and you go to look them up and figure out, and you're like, wait, there's no man and woman by that name I can find, anywhere in this county. Yeah. And, this person said they were born here, and it gets you really are left at that point for a lot of us with just DNA. So it's great that you guys went through some of those more obscure records and indexed them.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are really, they truly are hidden gems. And, especially, I have an illegitimate birth within my recent family history, my great grandfather, and we just have no documentation. We have nothing because the state that he lived in was not processing this as a criminal offense at the time, which again, we're not going to pass judgment using 21st century values on these historic records. But, I would love to have a fornication and bastardy box. Shawnee Valley, Tennessee, but here in Center County, we're able to connect people with those records, and that's really powerful for people who need that sort of documentation.
That's wonderful. So I did have someone tell me that sometimes the worse behaved your ancestors are, the luckier you get as a genealogist, because there might be more records.
Yes. As long as they weren't so naughty that they just disappear off the face of the earth.
Right.
Rich documentation is not a bad thing. Ancestors behaving badly can be a real boon for a researcher.
Right. So, Robbin, was there anything else that you wanted to share about the Center County Library and Historical Museum that I didn't ask you already?
The one thing I do want to add is I touched a little. We talked about this low-hanging fruit, and I mentioned we're a public library, so things are searchable in the catalog. If you are making a decision about whether or not a trip out to Center County is right for you, go to that website, www.centercountylibrary.org, and just type in, whatever your family's last name is, Stover, Schaefer, Luce, whatever it is, as many spellings as you can, and see. Because one of the benefits of our books being cataloged in a library catalog is that things are cross-referenced, because, the Schaefers might be mentioned in the Smith family genealogy, or the Stover family genealogy. So if you're making decisions about whether or not it's worth your while to come, start there, start searching. And if you're still not sure, but you think we might still be a good fit for you, give us a call. We are always happy to help connect you with your ancestors, and also to help you make a decision about whether or not a trip to CS is right for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love cross-indexing. It's so great.
It is wonderful. It's so handy.
It is, because you see the name on the shelf and you're like, oh, that's not my people. And then, so you don't pick it up, and then because you didn't get back maybe to that, to realize that they are your people, through marriage or something. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Don't forget about those marriages and how we lose names when people get married.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. All right. Well, Robbin, Degeratu.
There we go.
Hey, I got it. All right. always proud of myself when I can nail a name down and get it,
Absolutely.
But I really want to thank you for being on the podcast and sharing everything that the Center County Library and the Pennsylvania room there particularly has to offer for genealogical researchers. I really appreciate it. I think people have got to get there. It's a wonderful facility and just a wonderful town.
Well, thank you so much, and we would love to welcome you. Everyone who's listening to the podcast, come on in.
I want to thank Robbin Degeratu once again for all that she shared about Center County and their resources. Wasn't it fantastic? Have a question about how to complete your research in Pennsylvania? Go to my website, www.paancestors.com, and click the blue bar there that says Leave a Question. You can record a voicemail of up to 5 minutes, and I'll get that question and be able to use it on a future episode of the podcast. Thanks again for listening. This is Denise Allen, and join me next week for another county featured.